All right, good afternoon. I'm glad that you all have chosen to attend. Today we've got a number of folks who are appearing by webinar. We're at a bit of a disadvantage today because there was a technical difficulty with projection of the slides. So I'm going to have to read off the PowerPoint. The benefit to you is that I'm not going to spend as much time going through those slides as I otherwise would, which I think you'll probably find to be a little bit more enjoyable and a little easier for you. If any of you have worked with our office for any length of time, you know that Vicki Manning was the previous lobbyist liaison. Cynthia Ralston in our office took over those duties at the end of the year and has been handling that through the legislative session for us. So a number of you have spoken with her about the issues that you've had with registration, et cetera. And I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia fairly early in this presentation so that she can talk with you about the mechanics of registration and filing and how to comply with those requirements, which I honestly think will be a little bit more interesting to you and a little bit more relevant to the issues that you have to deal with. It is required, however, that we talk about the specifics of the Act and what's prohibited and what is allowed under the Ethics Act, and so I will spend some time talking about that. If any of you have any questions, those of you who are attending by webinar, Cynthia in the registration gave you her number to text questions to. I will give it to you again just in case you have any questions after we get started. That number is 334-303-1726. If you have questions, please text them to that number, and we will address those questions at the conclusion of the presentation in case the material that we go over answers some of those questions from the time that you ask it. So just remember that number, and if you have any questions, please text those questions to that number. Now, moving forward into the substance of the Ethics Act, I think it's important for you to know, first of all, how we're organized. And I'm the director of the commission. I'm Tom Albritton. I've been here since 2015. I am not the commission, however. I'm an employee of the commission, and currently our commission is made up of 4 individuals. We had 5, but one of them resigned in December of this year, of last year rather. We have 4 commissioners presently. Our chair is John Plunk, who is a lawyer from Athens, Alabama. Lynn Stewart, former Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, is our vice chair. Stan McDonald from Huntsville, Alabama is on our commission. He's an attorney up there as well. And then General Ed Kroll from Montgomery has made a return visit to the commission and is our newest commissioner. But they're the commission, and we serve at their pleasure. The commission makes all of the official decisions for the commission. What the staff can do, and what the staff spends most of its time doing, is answering questions for those who are affected by the Act, and that would certainly include all of you who are registered as lobbyists. So if you have a question about whether there is certain activity that should be reported, for example, or whether activity that you may be engaging in or somebody connected with you may be engaging in, whether that is definitionally lobbying, those are questions that we can answer for you. And we can do it through our informal opinion process. We give over 1,000 of those a year, so we spend most of our time, most days, answering informal questions for those who are affected by the Act. If you have a question that you want us to answer, you're more than welcome to call us. You can call Cynthia directly. I know you have her number. You can email us. You can email me as well. You can call the commission office. However, we have an administrative rule that requires that all informal advice we give must be given in writing, and the question must be given to us in writing. Again, that's by administrative rule. So feel free to talk to us as long as you want to. Eventually, though, we're going to ask you to reduce your question to writing and get it submitted to us. The process, once you submit it, is that our staff will review the question, formulate an answer, and get it back to you within 14 days. Occasionally, we have to go over 14 days if it's a particularly difficult question. And we are more often than not able to answer it well within the 14 days, sometimes the very day that it's asked. The point that I want you to remember about the informal opinion process is that if it is important to you, it's important to us, and we will get you an answer as quickly as we can. So if you are presented with an issue that is of utmost importance and you need it answered immediately, communicate that to us, and we'll do everything we can to get it answered for you quickly, sometimes even the day that it's asked. An informal opinion is reserved for questions for which the answer is abundantly clear, either in the Code of Alabama or in a previous advisory opinion that the Commission has issued. If it if you are asking us a question that has never been answered before, the statute's not clear in its direction about what the answer is, then we will request that you receive a formal advisory opinion. To be honest with you, most lobbyists who ask questions of us are asking questions about registration and that sort of thing, just how you comply with the basic requirements that are placed on you as a lobbyist. We don't get a ton of questions from lobbyists about what the law means in a certain area, but we have occasionally. If you are asking us something that is not easily answerable, or the answer is not abundantly clear from the sources that I just described to you, then we would recommend a formal advisory opinion. The difference between an informal opinion and a formal advisory opinion is that an informal opinion does not give you legal protection. A formal opinion, however, does. So if you think about it, if you are asking us a question about whether a certain expense satisfies the $250 requirement to be reported, that's something that's very easy for us to answer. If, however, you ask us the question about whether in an event in which you are a participant along with other lobbyists or principals, that being the companies that employ lobbyists, whether you can aggregate your expenses among all of the contributors, that's something that's not specifically answered within the code, and that is something that would be best reserved for a formal advisory opinion. And in fact, on that issue, we issued a formal advisory opinion to a principal who had that question about lobbyists. So what you need to remember is that that informal opinion process and the formal opinion process are both available to you. If you have a question, then we will give you some guidance through that about what would be most appropriate for your question. Do either of you have, because there's only two people in the room today, do either of you have any questions about either the formal opinion process or the informal opinion process? Okay. I think it's pretty straightforward. And again, this goes without saying, and for those of you attending by webinar as well, it goes without saying, if you have a question, and I suspect you may after you leave here today, just send those to Cynthia directly and we'll get an answer for you. Okay. Of course, violations of the Ethics Act are criminal in nature. For those who are convicted of violating the Ethics Act, punishment for intentional violations is a Class B felony. For other violations, it's a misdemeanor, but for the felonies, that's punishable by between 2 and 20 years in prison and a hefty fine as well. The commission itself is a referral body. We don't adjudicate guilt. We do find probable cause or the absence of probable cause. And any violation of the act that is filed with us has to begin with a formal complaint that is investigated by our commission or either dismissed by the commission. But if the commission finds that there's probable cause, then we will refer that to either the Attorney General's office for further prosecution or to the local DA. Now, again, for purposes of what you do, in the years that I have been here, I'm not aware of a case that's been filed against a lobbyist that we have considered. It's possible that that could be filed against you if you were to violate some of the provisions that prohibit certain transactions within the Act. So I will talk about those in some more detail in a little bit, but you do need to remember that violations of the Act are criminal in nature. Of course, the overall theme of the Act is that no public employee or official can use their official position for personal gain. But again, where y'all are concerned, the prohibition on you is what you give or cannot give to a public official. And that's something that if you haven't had a lot of experience with our office, you likely are familiar with the term thing of value, and that there's a prohibition on giving a thing of value to a public official or to a public employee. What that generally looks like are items of monetary value. I think the concerns that I hear from lobbyists are they want to know whether they can take public officials out for meals, whether they can invite them on recreational events, whether they can invite them to conferences that may be put on by an association that you work for. And of course, the answer to all those questions is yes, you can, but there are some limitations about how you can do that, when you can do it, and how much you can spend on that. I think you should start out with the recognition that the Code of Alabama provides a de minimis exception for things that are given to public officials. And that de minimis exception is defined as anything that is $25 or less. I understand that's not a great deal of money, and I don't expect anybody to get really excited about the de minimis exception to the general prohibition of giving a thing of value. But I will tell you that how I've seen that used by lobbyists that have asked for guidance from our office is generally in the form of maybe gift bags or other promotional items that are given as part of a larger event. And often they will ask us to approve the giving of those things because their value of what they're giving is less than $25. And again, as a lobbyist, I think the value in that for you is to know that that exception is there and that it certainly helps eliminate concern over some of the lower level exchanging of gifts that may occur as part of a larger event. So just remember that $25 figure and that there is a level of protection that is given for items that are less than $25. I am going to talk about 3 exceptions to the general prohibition of giving a thing of value that are really going to hit where you work daily. As a lobbyist, you are likely going to want to participate or to sponsor or to invite public officials to what is known as a widely attended event or to an educational function or possibly even an economic development function. Those are the 3 things that I see lobbyists requesting approval for and participating in more than anything else. A widely attended event is a gathering of 12 or more people where there's a diversity of views expressed and it is held either in state or out of state. And in conjunction with that, there may be meals, there may be other items of hospitality that are given, and all of that is allowed within the Code of Alabama. An educational function is a more formal event than a widely attended event. If you think about like if you have any familiarity with what is generally done in the state, like the BCA conference that's done every year is a classic educational function. It is a multi-day function surrounding revolving around an agenda of speakers and other seminars that are of interest to those who attend. And in conjunction with that, there are meals and there are other events that would be classified as hospitality. And that is allowed under the code too. The third thing would be an economic development function, which is not used as often, but a good example of that would be, and we haven't gotten a request for this in a couple of years now, but like the Farnsborough event that was held in England every year that was aviation related. There were groups from, certainly in the Wiregrass around Fort Rucker, that would always go over for that, and they would want to host dinners in association with their presence at Farnsborough. And they would classify that as an economic development function, and we agreed with them because there was a clearly articulable economic development goal they hoped to achieve through that, through the development of aviation in that region. And so that as an educational function and as a widely attended event were pre-certified by us as being exceptions to the general prohibition of giving a thing of value. Is that clear to y'all? Are those exceptions clear? Because I really think that's, to the extent you do any of this, that's really where you're going to live, would be primarily within those 3 exceptions. The other thing you need to know is that as a lobbyist, you do have a separate meal exception that is separate and apart from these 3 exceptions I just described. As a lobbyist, you have a 125 to 50 annual, 25 150, and then 50 250 for principals. 25 per occasion, 150 annually for lobbyists, and then $50 per occasion for principals, the companies that retain you, and an annual $250. That's separate and apart from the widely attended event and educational function exceptions, okay? I'm going to say that one more time because I do get asked that question some by lobbyists. If it's a widely attended event or an educational function or an economic development function, then there's not a dollar limitation on the meals. Okay, you do have to report if you spend in excess of $250, on any public official within a 24-hour period, but you don't have the same meal limitation. That meal limitation I gave you, the 25, 150, 50, 250, is separate and apart. It's a standalone exception. Okay. So the way that seems to work, I know that there are a lot of folks who would like to have unlimited ability, but we don't have that under the current version of the code. But there is some flexibility in there. And with the exceptions of widely attended event, educational function, and the separate meal exception, there are tools there that you can use to do your job. And they are there for you to use. If you have a question about whether a certain event is allowed under the Ethics Act and whether it falls within one of these exceptions, you are more than welcome to ask us to pre-certify that event. You don't have to ask us to pre-certify it, but we can. The process of pre-certification is simply that you send us a request for approval of an example, a widely attended event. You tell us what you're doing, who you're inviting, what you're giving them, and you will ask me to pre-certify that event. I will do that, and once I pre-certify it, if I pre-certify it, then we will place your request for pre-certification on our website, and that will be available to anyone to see. If you are starting out as a lobbyist, I would offer the pre-certification tab on our website as a resource to you, because you will be able to see what other people have requested. You will be able to see how they have constructed their events to be a widely attended event or an educational function, and you can use those as a model for what you want to do. And so I think it's a good resource for you as a lobbyist, especially if you've not been part of a widely attended event or planning one before. There's a template there for you to use that's easily accessible from our website. Okay, so any questions about those three events or any of those exceptions? Okay. What I want you to remember about the pre-certification process is that you have to request that at least 10 days ahead of time. That's by administrative rule again. So be sure if you want an event pre-certified, and again, you don't have to request pre-certification, but if you would like for it to be pre-certified, then that does have to be asked of us at least 10 days ahead of time. I just don't want you to get caught by that 10-day restriction. Okay. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia so that she can talk about the things that you're probably a little more interested in, and then I'll wrap up after she's through. This is so embarrassing.
Is it now?
It's on.
Okay, well, I'll just take it off now. Okay. Hello, I'm Cynthia. I'm going to go off script, and Tom said y'all might be more interested in what I've got to say, but that is yet to be seen. But typically, I just talk about pre-certification and advisory opinions. But today, I kind of wanted to talk to you all, because most of you are new or returning lobbyists that might not have been in the system for a while. So I wanted to talk about the mechanics of lobbying. And how to register and how to report. So how our registration process works is who starts the process is the lobbyist. So the lobbyist will register, and then the principal has to verify. This can be done online or on paper. If you do it online, the principal is going to get an email from what seems like a spam email address. It's receipts@nicusa.com. And I will send that out repeatedly and try to remind people, check your spam folder, check your junk folder. It's there, I promise. I can't redirect those unless I change the email for the principal. So if you need me to send it to somebody else, I can do that. But the three things we have to have for you to be registered is that you have registered, your principal is verified, and that you have paid your one-time $100 fee for the year. So that lasts you from January 1 to December 31st. But even if you register on December 20th in 2022, you will have to re-register on January 1st of 2023, okay? So you'll have to pay $100 again. Sometimes people get confused by that. And the principals, there is no fee for a principal to register. They're just verifying that you were lobbying on their behalf. We have a new email address that's dedicated to lobbyist principals so that we can be sure that that we are meeting your needs and answering your emails as quickly as we can, so that more than one person can do that if necessary. But it's pretty straightforward. It's lobbyistprincipal@ethics.alabama.gov. And we don't have that on the populated everywhere on the website, but that's coming soon. Also, Our website has got a lot of information on it. So if you go to the ethics.alabama.gov and you go to the Lobbyist Principles tab, that's going to have everything that you need. So I'm most likely I will help you get there, but you can file your quarterly reports online there. You can download paper copies of those reports if you need to, as well as your lobbyist registration and principal registration. So, and you have a link to the training dates. You have a link to the quarterly reports calendar. That's also on there that I know is helpful for people to make sure that you know when you're supposed to file. And if you don't know, it's April 30th. Your first quarter report has to be filed by then. And as we're talking about the process of registration, if you register on paper and send it in, we'll enter it per principal, okay? But when you register online with multiple principals, which is the preferred method, we just need to make sure that all the principals verify, because your registration won't be transferred over into our database until all the principals verify. And so that can sometimes be a process, but we may reach out to you and say, hey, lobbyist, can you please call your principal? And I've sent them 2 emails and I haven't heard back from them. Can you reach out? A lot of times it's that we have, transposed a letter, or the email address is wrong, or the wrong person is getting the email and they don't know what it's for. So those can be solved pretty easily, but we just are in constant communication. So I'll follow up with you if that happens to be your circumstance. But that has to happen before we transfer it over. Once it's transferred, if you're a new lobbyist, you'll get your credentials. If any of you are out there, well, no, none of you out there could not have your credentials because you've registered for the training, so that's great. But if you have any questions, you can just email me back about your credentials. If/when you don't remember the credentials, when you've got to file your quarterly reports or re-register, just let me know, and we're accessible to get those back to you pretty quickly. When you register online, it is really helpful if in the drop-down menu of principals that you really kind of make sure whether your principal is in that list or not. Because if you type in a new principal name, it creates a duplicate listing in our database. And so quite a bit of time is spent culling those duplicates in order to figure out which registration is the right one, and we've got to move all of the lobbyists under the correct principal. And so if you could really kind of take the time to look through and determine whether the principal is listed, maybe they have a "the" in front of their name instead of it being just, Brian Patterson, it's the Brian Patterson Group. If you can look for that, that'd be super helpful. And it would also speed up all the quarterly reports, because when we have duplicate principals, then they end up with different credentials to do different reports. So how to add a principal. If you've registered already, and all of you have, then while your registration is pending online, there is a way for you to add a principal. You just take that order ID. If everybody, I can't see you nodding in the audience, but on the web, but you remember when you got your receipt for however you paid, whether you sent in a check or you paid online, you had an order ID on your receipt. That order ID can be used to check the status of your registration. All you do is go to the Lobbyist Principal page and go to online registration, and it will take you to the screen where you put your credentials in to register, but also underneath that it says to check the status of your registration, go here, and then you enter your order number. And with that order number, you can see the status of every registration, and you can add a principal, okay? So if your registration has already been approved and it's transferred over to our database, you can no longer register a new principal online. You have to do that with a paper form. And all you have to do is you fill out your side, the lobbyist registration statement, even though you've already done that, because you need to add that principal on the businesses that you represent. And then the principal has to fill out their verification and sign it, and you send that to me, and we get that entered. And then it'll be available immediately. So let's see. We will send you, I do send quarterly reminders for you to update or file your quarterly reports. I will send them again closer to time. It's the 20th now, and so I'll probably send another one tomorrow for those who have not filed. I did, I was kind of filling a gap for this, so bless Vicki. She's having a great time in retirement. But when she left in October, we had trained an employee, and then that employee got a promotion in another agency and left. So I filled in without Vicki here, and so she has been a great resource to be on the phone, on the phone, and she left me great instructions. But I probably needed to send out my quarterly reminder before now, and to direct it only to people who have not filed yet, because everybody said, "Oh my gosh, I thought I had filed. Can you check?" So if you have filed, ignore my reminder. If you have not, please file. But I'll send you a new reminder in a couple of days. And I'll do that every quarter. And I think that's most of the processes the processes that I think are, yes, Austin? Yes, you can, thank you, Austin. Yes, you can check your quarterly reports online. If you just use your credentials to go log in, it'll tell you whether or not your quarterly report has been filed. And if you have a principal that's not listed, let me know. We'll make sure that gets listed, because we also have duplicate lobbyist registrations. Sometimes people didn't use their credentials and registered as a first-time registrant, and then you'll have duplicate credentials and you'll have a separate quarterly report. So we'll need to combine those registrations. But you can go on and look at those. The principal can see all of their lobbyists in that quarterly report as well. And then if you need to call and ask whether or not you filed a quarterly report, and you can also mail your quarterly reports in. But we're happy to look up any of that information for you. And the quarterly reports also, even if you mail them in, they will be reflected online. So you can still use your credentials to go in and see whether or not your quarterly report has been properly filed. Does anybody have any questions out there on the webinar about the process for registration? Okay. Tom, is there anything you haven't covered? It's Will. Okay. Well, the thing that y'all can ask me pre-certification questions also, and send those. We have a pre-certs email that you can send those requests to, but I think Tom covered that. And we've got several advisory opinions that you can read about that can give you a little bit more information about the pre-certification process. I'll give you the numbers for those. So advisory opinion 2011-09, those can be found on our website. Also at ethics.alabama.gov, there's a tab for advisory opinions. These are the formal advisory opinions that Tom talked about, where the commission has voted to approve an opinion written by the staff. And so this gives you a lot of parameters about what behavior is acceptable and what you can give a public official or not, or employee. 2016-15 is the opinion that discusses de minimis lobbying. If you're lobbying for compensation and you otherwise meet the definition of a lobbyist, it doesn't matter how little lobbying you do, you're still a lobbyist in Alabama and you'd have to register. I know that Tom talked about only a recreational event would not be an exception to the thing of value. If it's an integral part, that's advisory opinion 2011-11, that also covers the integral part of a conference or a widely attended event. Being an exception to the definition of a thing of value. Advisory opinion 2018-01 discusses aggregation of expenses. If you have multiple principals or lobbyists that are sponsoring an event, you can aggregate some of those costs, and that opinion will give you an outline about how you can do that. 2018-07 was written because there's a 3625-1 defines lobbying and lobbyist, and then 3625-1.1 defines lobbying as somebody who, let's see, they don't have to register. You don't have to register as a lobbyist if you are selling goods and services to county or municipal government, but you do if you're doing that with state government, and that's what we call the 1.1 is referred to as executive lobbying, but executive branch lobbying. So if you are seeking contracts with the state, you would have to register, and that opinion speaks to that. Okay, I think that's all I've got to cover right now.
I told you were going to like the fact that the PowerPoint was broken, because normally we would spend almost an hour doing this, going slide by slide. But I really think that what Cynthia just went over are probably the things that day in and day out you're going to probably have more questions about. And so much of this is just you learning the process of how to get the answers to the questions that you may have. So I'm going to try to summarize it for you as best as I can in layman's terms about what you can and can't do. You can't offer anything to a public official to corruptly influence their official action. I don't care how much money it is. So if you think about that general prohibition, think about bribery. If you were to offer somebody money in order to achieve a certain legislative result for you, that is likely going to be offering them something to corruptly influence their official action. That's something you cannot do. There is a general prohibition that you can't give them things of value. You can't just give them gifts just because, unless it falls within one of the restrictions. Yes, you can take them out to dinner. Remember what your limits are with that. Remember that it's $25 per occasion, $150 annually, and your principal can spend $50 and $250. Y'all can't combine that together in one meal. However, there is that exception. You can invite them out to dinner as part of a widely attended event or as an educational function. The recreational activities that Cynthia was talking about are typically golf and fishing. If you want to just take them on a fishing trip that's not connected with a larger educational function, that is something that our advisory opinions have said you cannot do. But if it is an integral part of a larger event, like an educational function, then it is hospitality that is allowed as part of the overall function. Okay? And the same way with meals that are associated with that, or with items that may be given as promotional items as part of that larger event. So remember that those are the general guidelines about what you can and can't do in terms of giving them things. One section that we didn't talk about, but that you need to be aware of, there is one section in our Act that I think everybody would say is abundantly clear, and that is Section 23C. And it says that a lobbyist cannot be solicited for anything, whether it is a thing of value or not. Except for a campaign contribution. Thank you, Brian. So there's that general prohibition against all of you being solicited for anything. And that is probably the clearest restriction that is in the Act. And it was set up to prevent lobbyists from being hit up for contributions that are not campaign contributions. And that's been in the Ethics Act since 2010 at least. So there's that restriction as well. As a lobbyist, remember this: if you have to update your registration, the code does say you have to do it within 10 days. What I would advise you to do is to talk with Cynthia about the method for updating your registration if it is something that is not easy for you to do. Second of all, communicate with your principal, because as Cynthia explained to you, the principal's confirmation that you're lobbying for them is critical to your registration too. And it is customary during the session for sure that somebody will call and complain about somebody being over at the State House lobbying when they have not registered with us. And our response through Vicki for years always was, they are registered with us, but their principal hasn't confirmed it, so it's not showing up on our website yet. And as you might expect, within a very short period of time, the confirmation comes. There have been problems when the lobbyist and the principal are not communicating with each other well enough so that the principal doesn't know that that's what the holdup is. So make sure you're communicating with your principal about your registrations. Remember your quarterly filings. If you have somebody else who's doing that for you, my recommendation is that you review them yourself. We haven't had a lot of problems with quarterly reports, but every now and then, people who are interested in what I'm talking about here is the press will go through quarterly reports, and especially if you have had an event pre-certified, they have before matched up your request for pre-certification, including the location where you're having the event, and they'll look at, for example, the cost of the rooms at the Grand Hotel or wherever. And then they will look at your quarterly reports and say, well, they didn't disclose that they had expenditures in excess of $250. And there may be a perfectly good reason why you haven't disclosed them, the chief one being that you didn't expend more than $250 in a 24-hour period, which is what your disclosure requirement is. We have had a couple of instances where somebody filed the quarterly report for the lobbyist, and the lobbyist didn't review it. And once it was pointed out to the lobbyist, that the quarterly report was in error, they amended it and got the proper disclosure in. We then had to deal with the press taking us to task for allowing you to amend your quarterly report. And that's fine, because we would rather you just get the correct disclosure in. However, it would save both of us, some heartache if you could just review and make sure that whoever is submitting is submitting an accurate quarterly report for you. I think that ultimately helps you a lot more. On that point, though, I want this to be abundantly clear. Where the lobbyists who operate with our office are concerned more than anything else, we are here to help you comply, and that is all we want to do. So if you have filed something in error, please tell us that. We will give you every opportunity to get an accurate filing in place. We don't want you not mentioning it to us and then having somebody else bring it up. Our chief function is to make sure that the information that is out there for the public to review is accurate. So if you tell us that you have filed something that is inaccurate, it is our duty to get an accurate filing in place, and we want to encourage that. So if you have questions, or if you did something in error, please don't be hesitant about just telling us that you need to file something else, because that's what we want you to do. And then finally, if you have any questions, just ask. When you walk out of here, I could go through the entire code, I could give you a test on it, and you might remember it enough to pass the test, and then you're going to walk out and forget it. So what I can tell you is that if you will remember the general prohibitions, and if you will remember the general exceptions to that, and then more than that, if you will remember that our website is an opportunity for you to see what other people have done that we have approved, then I think that you'll find your way through this. And if you don't, through that process of looking at what is publicly available, all you got to do is pick up the phone or email us, and we'll be more than happy to answer the questions for you. So, does anybody have any questions online?
No, I have one more thing to add.
Okay, did the two of you have any questions about anything that I've mentioned? Okay, well, I'm going to turn it back over to Cynthia real quick, and then we'll be through.
So quarterly reports, as he was talking about it, I realized I didn't mention, the principal and the lobbyist have to file quarterly reports. I know that the quarterly reports for the principals and lobbyists look remarkably similar, because it's really just about the lobbying activities. So you can help them fill it out, you can tell them what they did, or what you did, and just because you lobbied doesn't mean you had any expenditures, and that is okay. People sometimes get confused because they don't realize, they do realize that they're lobbying, and so they check the yes box, but they feel compelled to say, what they were doing. You don't have to do that. You just check yes, I lobbied, and then no if there was no expenditures. Okay, so if y'all, I am open for questions anytime, all the time. I answer email. I'm very accessible. And if anybody has any suggestions about or comments on whether or not the mechanics of this was helpful in this training, that would be good too, because that's the first time I've done that. Because now that I've experienced the back end of it, which Ms. Manning did beautifully, I thought that might be helpful to y'all. But it would also be good to know if it wasn't all that helpful to you. So, okay, thank y'all, and let me know if you have questions.